The current guidelines are dated 2013, which marks the introduction of the Criminal Procedure Act. And so new guidelines came in then, and they've been added to and bits patched onto them over time. And it was time to do a comprehensive review, which we have done over the last 2 and a bit years, possibly close to 3 years. So the 2024 guidelines went up on the 1st of October, and as I'm sure you recall, there was criticism of the lack of clarity of the introduction about what was being said in my introduction about the disproportionate representation of Māori in our criminal justice system. And I listened to that concern. It was both in public, media and public, but also a lot of correspondence to me in my office. And I realised that I could have done better with the way I had worded that particular part of the introduction, recognising the context that Māori are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system, but not being clear enough about what that meant for prosecutors. And this point was so important that I knew I had to pull that down and promptly resolve that lack of clarity, which we've done. And as I say, today we'll be reissuing the guidelines, because what's so important for people, and particularly the public, who need to be confident in the criminal justice system and confident that our prosecutors are fairly and transparently doing their work. What's so important that they understand, and what the guidelines did emphasise, but my introduction then managed to smudge, is that the criminal justice system has always required application to the individual, understanding the individual circumstances and background and why they have come to here in their criminal offending, and what is their culpability. How should the law respond? How should the prosecutor respond? And then later, how should the court respond, excuse me, in sentencing, excuse me, and so on. So that is why we did it. It was just too important for that misunderstanding, the misunderstanding being the Solicitor-General saying there are two different types of approach in the law that cannot stand. So that was why I had to take it down and clarify, which we've done. And I'm really pleased that we are now able to re-release a really comprehensive set of, there are about 27 individual guidelines, and they cover the range of things from the decision to prosecute, also encouraging prosecuting agencies to think about how do they go through processes that ensure, as best as they can, they eliminate unintentional bias in their decision making. How can they make sure that they see the whole person when they decide, do we charge, how do we charge, are alternatives a good idea, how do I think about the person, how do we take account of victims' interests, how do we characterise the crime in community and what it needs, making sure that they can get themselves through those four kind of quadrants of thinking about it. But the guidelines also cover all manner of things like bail and sentencing, and there are a couple on victims' rights and how prosecutors need to be thinking through, as they do, victims' interests and meeting them in their processes. So that's where we're up to today. The issue that emerged was whether the Solicitor-General was saying there's a different rule for Māori from everybody else, and that was the error I needed of understanding I needed to correct. But the guidelines still recognise, in fact, one of the context of the review that we've done, this comprehensive review, one of the drivers, one of the context pieces is that hard fact that Māori are persistently disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. And so how these guidelines deal with that is, as I was just saying before to Mr. Garcia, is about making sure that people are approaching the person, not thinking about whether they're a particular part of a particular group, but the person, what brings them to here, how can we understand their culpability,